Module Overview. Gender, youth, and social inclusion are no longer peripheral concerns in rural development. They are at the heart of achieving equitable, sustainable, and participatory growth in rural areas. Historically, rural development programs and extension services have often overlooked or underrepresented women, youth, people with disabilities, ethnic minorities, and marginalized groups, perpetuating cycles of poverty and inequality. This module explores the concepts, frameworks, and strategies for embedding inclusive development into rural policies, programs, and extension services. It underscores the need for a transformative, rights-based, and intersectional approach to ensure that rural development efforts are truly empowering, responsive, and effective for all population segments. 1. Understanding gender and social inclusion in rural development. Gender refers to socially constructed roles, responsibilities, opportunities, and power dynamics between men, women, and non-binary individuals. In rural settings, women often face structural barriers in land ownership, access to credit, inputs, education, and decision-making. Social inclusion involves creating an enabling environment where all individuals, regardless of gender, age, disability, ethnicity, caste, religion, or geographic location, can participate fully in development processes, benefit from services, and claim their rights. Youth inclusion is especially critical, as rural youth represent a growing demographic with potential to drive innovation, productivity, and resilience if provided with proper tools, training, and opportunities. 2. The gender gap in rural development. Despite playing essential roles in agriculture, food security, caregiving, and natural resource management, women and girls in rural areas face significant inequalities, limited land ownership. In many countries, less than 20% of landholders are women. Access to finance. Women farmers receive less than 10% of available agricultural credit. Underrepresentation. Women are vastly underrepresented in farmer cooperatives, rural leadership, and policymaking. Gendered labor burdens. Women spend more hours in unpaid work, water fetching, fuel wood collection, caregiving. Extension service gaps. Most rural extension officers are male, and services often do not account for women's schedules or literacy levels. Bridging the gender gap is not just a justice issue, it has economic benefits. According to FAO, closing the gender gap in agriculture could lift over 100 million people out of hunger. 3. Youth and rural development. Youth, typically aged 15 to 35, are critical agents of change. However, rural youth face limited access to land, capital, training, and markets, leading to rural-urban migration, unemployment, and disillusionment. Key youth challenges: lack of vocational training and entrepreneurship programs, social exclusion from traditional decision-making structures, barriers to credit, land, and innovation adoption, outdated curriculum in agricultural training institutes, stereotyping of agriculture as dirty and unprofitable work, empowering youth through agripreneurship, ICT in agriculture, climate action, and digital innovation is essential to modernizing rural economies. 4. Socially excluded groups in rural contexts. In many rural regions, certain groups are marginalized due to identity, geography, or status. These include ethnic and religious minorities, indigenous peoples, people living with disabilities, elderly persons without support, internally displaced persons, and refugees, people living in remote and fragile areas. Inclusive development must target their specific barriers such as language, infrastructure, stigma, or service inaccessibility. 5. Gender and social inclusion in extension services. Extension services must be reoriented to be gender responsive and inclusive by recruiting and training more female extension workers, providing gender-sensitive training content and delivery modes, scheduling training sessions at times that accommodate women's workloads, using visual and audio methods for illiterate populations, organizing youth-focused innovation hubs and demonstration plots, adapting content for people with disabilities through assistive technologies, encouraging men's engagement in gender equality discussions, participatory approaches such as gender action learning systems, GALS, youth participatory research, and community mapping help elevate marginalized voices. 6. Institutional and legal frameworks for inclusion. Governments and development partners are increasingly recognizing the need for mainstreaming inclusion in policies and plans. Relevant instruments include Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD, the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, especially Goal 5, Gender Equality Goal, 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth, Goal, 10, Reduced Inequalities, National Gender and Youth Policies, Affirmative Action for Rural Women and Youth in Cooperatives, Land Tenure Laws, and Agribusiness Funding. 7. Tools and indicators for measuring inclusion. Measuring inclusion requires disaggregated data and relevant metrics. Indicators might include percent of women/youth in extension programs, percent of rural women with secure land rights, percent of training sessions held in indigenous languages, percent of extension materials accessible to people with disabilities, representation of marginalized groups in rural councils. Qualitative indicators, such as perception of empowerment, mobility, and voice in decision-making, are equally important. 8. Strategies for promoting inclusive, rural development. Gender audits of programs and institutions, youth advisory committees in agricultural planning, mentorship and coaching programs for young farmers, gender budgeting to ensure resource equity, digital inclusion, mobile services, apps, radio and video for outreach, safe spaces, and leadership development for rural women and youth engagement of men and boys to challenge patriarchal norms, integration of social inclusion in monitoring and evaluation, M&E Systems. 9. Case studies and global best practices. Kenya's Uwezo Fund and Women Enterprise Fund provide microloans to women and youth. Nigeria's Empower Agro program trains youth for extension roles. India's Mahila Kisan Sashaktikaran Pariyojana (MKSP) promotes women farmers. Ghana's Young Entrepreneurs Network (YAN) for youth-led agribusiness. FAO's Demetra Clubs for community empowerment of rural women. Ethiopia's land certification program included joint title deeds for women and men.